In this video, I want to show you how to find the perfect land for off-grid living in Kenya. And so that we're on the same page, off-grid property isn't necessarily the cheapest piece of land you can be able to find. In fact, cheap land becomes incredibly expensive once you try to make that land livable. So before you go into a property website like Gigi or Property 254 and start looking for that bargain acre, I want you to first understand what you're actually looking for. For those who are not familiar with the term, off-grid living simply means living in a property that is not dependent or it's minimally dependent on the systems that most of us are currently using. Systems like electricity, internet, piped water, sewer, but I'm not saying these things are there, but you may have to generate like your own electricity through solar. You may have to find your own water through drilling a borehole or a well, or just collecting rainwater or harvesting water from different sources, like fetching it from a river. You'll most likely end up growing your own food, and instead of entirely depending on what's around you, you are designing the property to be self sufficient and to be as self sufficient as possible. And this trend is becoming increasingly attractive in Kenya. And this is because people are tired of living in cities. They want more space. They are looking for more privacy. They want to get away from all the congestion that is there in towns like Nairobi. And people are looking to live a quieter lifestyle. And some people, they are looking at working more remotely. On the other hand, other people are looking at reconnecting with nature or growing their own food, keeping animals, building holiday homes, or people want to simply have a different kind of lifestyle than what we've been accustomed to. But one of the hardest things about planning to go off grid is finding the right land to do it, because every cheap piece of land is not suitable for off-grid living. And then in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to show you the kind of land you should be looking for. I'll also tell you the kind of land you most importantly need to avoid. And towards the end, I'll tell you some of the best places in Kenya where I, as a real estate agent, would recommend that you start looking when you think of off-grid living. And if you're there and you're planning to buy land in the next 6 to 12 months and you want step by step guidance through the process, this is something that I usually provide to my clients. So feel free to reach out to me. We usually help our clients identify the right location that is suitable for them. We help them evaluate them, and we are going to support you step by step through the full buying process. So if that's you, give us a call using the number below and this number in the description, and let's see how we can best support you. Let's start with what you really need to do. This might sound very strange, but the first mistake I see most people making is going straight into property websites and starting to look for land that has been listed for sale. But for you, you shouldn't start there. You should start with first determining the budget that you have, and most importantly, determining the location. Let me explain. When I tell you that you first need to decide on your budget, I'm not just talking about the money that you have that is available to buy the land. You think about this differently, because off-grid living is like a project. You have to think, how much is the land that you're buying going to cost? But once you buy the land, it will most likely be bare. So you also need to factor in how much will it cost to prepare the land in a way that you can make it livable. And after that, how much will it cost to build on that land? Because once you take all this into consideration, the costs start to add up. You have to think of power, water, electricity, and roads if you need to set up such. You also need to think about waste disposal. You have to do a biodigester or a pit latrine. And then it's the 21st century. What about internet? You also have to think, what kind of construction will you make, and where will you be getting these construction materials? Because this is where people make the most mistake. They find an acre of land and probably they find it for like 300,000 and they think they found a property that is available for bargain. But then they discover that the roads leading to that land is terrible. They also realize there is no reliable source of water. There isn't electricity anywhere close by. You may also find that that piece of land requires a lot of preparation before you can build on it. And suddenly, the 300,000 that you had bought that piece of land for doesn't look cheap anymore. So, before you ask, where can I find cheap land? Ask yourself a different question. Ask yourself, what will it cost you to turn that piece of land into the life that you actually want? And that should be the priority for you if you are planning to live off grid. While that is the first step, the second step is just as important. The good thing about off grid living is that you can be able to have a lot of options to think through. You do not necessarily need to go with one particular part of the country. In fact, one of the first places I would tell you to consider it's the county you grew up in. And before you hang me up, there's a very simple reason for this. If you go to the county that you probably grew up in, you already understand the county. You understand which towns are there and which towns are livable. You understand the climate of that place, and probably your body is already acclimatized to it. You already understand the culture of the community that is there. You would also have an idea, like if you're planning to do agriculture, you would already know the areas that are agriculturally productive. Probably you also understand the people who are there, and even you may even speak or understand the local language. And that last one, being able to understand the local language, is more important than most people think. So if you're planning to move somewhere permanently and live like a rural lifestyle, being able to communicate in the local community language and be able to understand the local culture can make a very huge difference in your ability to settle in easily. We all know every 5 years there are elections, and the way Kenya is, you need to understand where you are really living. So, if you come from a particular county, you already understand the area, you shouldn't automatically assume that you need to move very far away to find your dream piece of land. You could start building at home. But if your home county doesn't work for you, then you can start looking at other parts of the country. And for me, Kajiado, Machakos, Laikipia, and some part of Kiambu are some of the areas I would seriously consider. I would also think of Kilifi, but for very different reasons, and we'll get into it. Let's start with the first county that I would consider if I wanted to live off grid. Let's start with Kajiado. One of the biggest advantages of Kajiado as a place to go live off grid is how close it is to Nairobi. I know this is a double-edged sword, but for Kajiado, you can get relatively far away from Nairobi, find bigger parcels of land, and still have the possibility of accessing Nairobi without completely discontinuing yourself from the city. But if you want to completely go off grid, it's still possible as well. Again, Kajiado, it's an area where land remains relatively affordable. Places such as Kisaju in parts of the wider Kajiado, you can get opportunities to buy land without going too far away from Nairobi. But there is a very big important warning here. Don't buy land in Kajiado simply because someone tells you that this is Kajiado and there is water. For Kajiado, you need to make sure you clearly check how the water is. Because in some parts of Kajiado, a borehole may work today, but in 2 years' time, it may not have water. And even because your neighbor built a well and it's working, doesn't automatically mean if you buy next to your neighbor that you will be able to access continuous water. So before you buy any property, you need to understand the water situation of that specific property, not the area, not like the surrounding, the specific property you are buying before you commit your money. Because when you go and start living off grid, water is not something that you treat like a luxury. Water is usually, actually, water is the foundation of entire off grid living. If Kajiado is not your thing, let's look at Machakos as a county for off grid living. Because Machakos is one area I would seriously consider, and I would do this because of one, its proximity to Nairobi, and second, prices. Again, in Machakos, you have areas where you can find relatively affordable pieces of land, and you can potentially have a balance between completely going off grid and still maintaining access to the city. And in Machakos, you can have more space for more or less the same cost. In Machakos, again, you'll have a lot of privacy. And Machakos is a county in most places that you can actually farm. Again, for Machakos, you're not necessarily so far away, like you would have to plan a trip to and from Nairobi, and maybe a trip from other counties, it becomes like an expedition. But just like Kajiado, don't look at the price per acre alone. Look at that specific location. Just look how easily accessible to the road that place is. Look at the water. Is piped water available, or can you be able to drill a borehole or a well? Then look at the soil, because if you're planning to farm, the soil type is very important. And look also at the surrounding developments. You also don't want to be in the remotest part. And once you look at that, ask yourself, what will this property look like 5 or 10 years from now? Because we're not just buying that land to live in today. You are buying into the whole location, the whole ecosystem that is in that location. But let's say Machakos is not your area. Which is the next county you should look at? Let's talk about Laikipia. Or is it Nyandaro? Let's talk about Laikipia. Laikipia is usually particularly interesting for most of the customers that have taken there. And one thing they've always loved about Laikipia is the landscape, and they also like the lifestyle possibility that places like Laikipia provides. Laikipia has very beautiful pieces of land. We've been able to help most of our clients get space in Laikipia at very affordable prices. And Laikipia usually gives you access to towns like Nanyuki easily. And Nanyuki itself becomes very interesting because it's relatively developed, it's very cosmopolitan. So you can have your rural or semi rural property if that's what you want, while you still have access to good malls, good shops, good restaurants, good services, security, and different amenities if you go to Nanyuki. And there's another possibility there. For the clients who we've taken to Nanyuki, they've always been open to the possibility of being able to set up short-term rentals like Airbnbs because of the kind of population that is in Nanyuki and the ease of getting to Nanyuki from Nairobi. So if you buy into Laikipia, your off-grid home doesn't necessarily have to be just a home. It could potentially be some income generating asset that you're going to sell. But again, for Nanyuki and areas in Laikipia, don't assume that every part of Laikipia is suitable for you. There are areas where security can be a very big concern. I have been chased from different parcels in Laikipia which we had gone to view. So you need to understand the specific location that you are buying into. You need to understand the surrounding community, and you also need to check ahead the security situation before buying. And not just buying. Even before you go visit the land, please go online and get information from someone who already understands those specific places. Let's say you don't want to go off-grid living in Laikipia. Let's talk about Kitui. And this is where things get really interesting. If your dream is not just to have 1 acre, but to have lots of space, Kitui can give you some very interesting possibilities. We've been able to find parcels in Kitui that are going for around 50,000 per acre. And in some places, you can actually be able to buy your own hill for what you could probably be buying for a plot in Nairobi. You could have your whole ranch and your whole hill to worship in for the same amount of money that people are buying plots in Nairobi. Now, I know that sounds very fantastic, but here's the trade off. And the major trade off is one. If you're going to buy land in Kitui, you have to consider the distance. If you're coming from Nairobi, getting to parts of Kitui can really take you time, considering some of them the road is not tarmac. So, if you're going to buy land in Kitui, don't expect to just take a quick afternoon trip to Kitui and come back. Leave that to people who are buying in Machakos, people who are buying in Kajiado, and some parts of Kiambu. If you're buying in Kitui, you may probably have to go there and spend the night. And that ability to go and come back matters a lot, particularly when you are conducting your due diligence. When you're looking at a place to live, you don't want to just look at one piece of land and make a decision. And you don't want to just go look at a piece of land and start paying a deposit. No, you need to be able to go view a piece of land and then take time to do your due diligence. You need to visit a piece of land more than once. You need to take your friends to see that piece of land to help you make a decision. You need to go there probably with your family for them to see the land that you're buying. You need to go there, talk to a few neighbors. You need to go walk through the area to understand the area in a better way. So, because you may want to look at different parcels before you understand what you're actually buying, if distance is a concern to you, then areas like Kitui are not for you. And if distance is a big factor, that is where the next location I recommend comes in. Let's look at Kiambu. Now, you must be wondering, if you are looking at an off-grid property, is Kiambu right for you? Well, most of Kiambu won't be my first choice if I'm recommending a property and your goal is to go completely offline or off grid living. And the reason why Kiambu doesn't work is quite simple. A lot of Kiambu is already quite developed, so prices are off the roof. If you're also close to Nairobi again, that won't really count as off-grid living. Because for off-grid living, you must go to a place where you are even able to reconnect with nature, and most part of Kiambu do not give you that. The only advantage of Kiambu is you can be able to quickly rush and come back. But for Kiambu, you are not really escaping all this kind of infrastructure that is already there. You are still in your comfort zone. But there are still areas in Kiambu where you can find large tracts of land and you can be able to create something that feels very private and self-sufficient. For example, there are areas like Goirofi where you can still find land opportunities, although you are living completely off the grid. We have several pieces of land that we are selling in those areas, and for around 2 million shillings, you can be able to get 3 or 5 acres for that, depending on the exact location and the specific characteristics of that property. If you're looking for around 5 acres in Kiambu for under 5 million, give us a call and we can be able to link you up with different pieces. But these are for off-grid living. Don't come for these pieces if you are still looking at living in the conventional style. But let's say Kiambu is off your budget. Where else can you go for off-grid living? Let's talk about the cost. The cost is another completely different proposition, because you can still find areas around Kilifi, Malindi, and in these areas around even Kwale, the land can be very cheap and you can be able to set up there. In some of these locations, you may even hear of land going for around 100,000 per acre. And there are even pieces that we are selling in Malindi, an acre for around 150,000, and you have big tracts of land. But once again, you have to understand the trade off. Remember, I said cheap land isn't necessarily cheap land. Some of these areas, like Malindi and areas of Kilifi, have accessibility challenges. And again, for the cost, you need to be extremely careful with land documentation and ownership. Coastal land has a long history of complicated land issues and scooter issues, and you do not want to save all your hard earned money and see you buy a property that you later lose to the local community because you didn't do your proper due diligence. So, if you're looking at buying properties in the coast, title verification is not something that you do as a by the way. It's something that you have to invest your time on to do your proper due diligence. And if that's not your thing, we have pieces of land that we've already done our due diligence on, and reach out to us and we can link you up. But the coast also has very interesting advantages for off-grid living. Water can be easier to access. You just dig a small well or a small borehole and you're able to get water. The climate at the coast is also very different. It's very warm, it's very welcoming, and you can easily be able to farm there if that's your thing. And you also have access to a beach. And if you want to live close to Mombasa, then Kilifi and coastal areas are something that I would really recommend if you want to do off-grid living. But remember, it's all about trade-off. Now that we've talked about all the areas that you need to buy property in, let, let's talk about the land itself. Because finding the right county or the right place to buy is one thing, but you can choose the right county and still buy the wrong piece of land. And one of the things, as you are looking to buy land, you need to be absolutely sure of it's the kind of soil that you're finding. You have to ask yourself, what type of soil is this piece of land sitting on? Because if you're planning to grow your own food, that's obviously a good factor to consider because soil affects more than even just agriculture. It's going to affect the drainage that you set up. It's going to affect how you build, and it's also going to affect like the foundation that you are going to build on that property. It's also going to affect even how you dispose of your waste. And it affects your waste in this way because if you are planning to have a septic, if you are planning to have either a septic system or if you're planning to have a biodigester, you need to understand whether the ground is suitable for what you are planning to set up. So you don't just look at a beautiful piece of land and say, this is perfect. You need to make sure you are assessing the land properly. You need to understand what's happening even above the ground as much as you want to understand what's happening beneath it. And this same thing on soil also applies to water. If you're thinking about drilling a borehole, just don't rely on what the neighbor tells you around the area. You need to get a proper assessment done because two properties may look the same, the neighbor and this neighbor, but the water table and the conditions underneath it could be completely different. And don't forget about the animals because when you move into rural Kenya, you are moving closer to nature. And that means you need to understand the whole environment that you are moving into. You move close to a dam, you need to understand will there be hippos around. In some areas, including parts of Coast Province, like let's say in Ukambani, you need to be aware of all the snakes and other wildlife that are lying around. I'm not saying this to scare you, but we've all seen all these wild animals lying in wait. You go rural areas, you are going into another Australia out there. In the same way, you're investigating water, roads, soil. You should also understand the local wildlife security, and you need to understand the local community. With this in mind, where should you actually buy? Well, there isn't one answer that fits all, but here's the summary. So, where should you buy land if you are looking to go off grid living in Kenya? First, if you are from a particular county and you already understand that area, start there. Second, if you want to remain relatively close to Nairobi, try places such as Kajiado and Machakos. If you want beautiful landscapes and you are looking for larger parcels of land, and you also want access to a cosmopolitan center, look at areas like Laikipia and Kajiado. If you want very large pieces of land, then you have to travel further, go to areas like Kitui, go to the coast and check out areas like Malindi. If you want the coast, Kilifi can offer some very easy and interesting opportunities, but you need to make sure you are doing your due diligence carefully. And if you want something that is closer to Nairobi, where you have more established infrastructure, then you have to think of Kiambu. But prices in Kiambu are prices in Kiambu. But here's the thing. The perfect off-grid property isn't the one like with the lowest price per acre, but it's the property where the land, the water, the soil, accessibility to that land, the security around it, the community that is there, the climate, and the budget that you have all make sense when combined together. That is why I don't recommend that you start by browsing property websites. I want you to start by thinking around the life that you want to build. Once you think about that life, determine the budget that you have, determine the best location for you, and it's only after you do these two should you start talking about buying the land. Because the wrong piece of land can become a very, very expensive mistake if you buy. And if you're planning to buy land within the next 6 to 12 months and you don't want to go all through this process alone, me and my team can be able to help you. We work with our customers to help them identify the right areas. We find suitable properties for them. We assess the opportunities. And most importantly, we guide them through the buying process. And before you commit your money, you should know exactly what you're buying and why you are buying it. If that is something you'd like my team to help you with, give us a call and we shall be glad to work with you on that. Once you call, we'll have a conversation about what you're looking for, your budget, where you want to live, and the kind of lifestyle that you are aiming to build. And it's only after that happens, we'll see how best we can be able to support you. Because we understand finding land is easy, but finding the right land is the real work. And that is where we come in. And happy off grid living.